One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died.
Chernobyl, one of the most radioactive places on Earth, is a name that still echoes like a warning. It was meant to be a simple science experiment, but what happened on April 26, 1986, turned the sky red, shattered lives, and unleashed a silent poison that still pulses beneath the soil today. Nearly 40 years later, scientists keep returning. Their cameras keep rolling. But not everything they've found can be easily explained. Some discoveries are extremely disturbing, and some are so strange they've left even the experts shaken. Here are the 6 real discoveries inside the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone that left scientists stunned and too afraid to go any further. Number 4 will shock you. On the night of April 26, 1986, something went terribly wrong inside Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It started as a safety test, a simple routine procedure meant to simulate a power outage. But unfortunately, due to a flawed reactor design, poor communication, and human error, the test spiraled out of control. Within seconds, pressure built up inside the core of the reactor until it exploded, tearing through the building and releasing a radioactive fire that would burn for days. The blast was so powerful, it blew off the reactor's extremely heavy steel lid and hurled debris across the complex. But the true horror wasn't the explosion, it was the invisible cloud of radioactive isotopes that spread across Europe. Unfortunately, thousands of people were exposed, and they were forced to evacuate their homes and towns almost immediately. And for the next several decades, the region became a no-go zone for most of the world. But scientists couldn't stay away forever. As the area was sealed off, a network of cameras, sensors, and research devices was installed to monitor what was left behind. What they captured, decades later, would not only defy science but would send chills through even the most experienced researchers. 6. The Red Forest, nature's most radioactive graveyard. While the immediate devastation of the explosion that night was unimaginable, one of the long-term impacts was the creation of a dead zone that later became known as the Red Forest. This area, located just a few kilometers from the plant, is now one of the most radioactive places on Earth and a haunting reminder of the night that everything went wrong. The Red Forest, named after the reddish-brown hue that overtook the trees, became an eerie graveyard that replaced an environment where life once thrived. The trees, poisoned by the intense radiation, withered and died in droves, their needles turning from green to a startling reddish-brown. It looked as though nature had painted the trees in a deathly color. These eerie scenes were witnessed by scientists and the crew that was sent to clean up the environment shortly after the explosion, and in many ways, this red forest has remained a painful reminder and a symbol of how nature can be ruined by the mistakes of humans. Immediately after the explosion happened, authorities quickly recognized how extremely dangerous the radioactive contamination in that area could be, and so, the Red Forest was declared a place too dangerous for not just humans but for wildlife as well. The area became a forbidden zone, a no-man's land where radiation levels were so high that it became unsafe for people to remain for even the shortest periods. In fact, the official exclusion zone, which covers a vast stretch of land around the plant, was put in place, and the Red Forest became part of it. But in the decades that followed, scientists became curious about the Red Forest, and so, they flocked to the deserted area to see the ruins and understand the effects of radiation on the environment. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found. It was discovered that even after so many decades, the radiation levels in the Red Forest remained intensely high, with certain areas delivering a year's worth of typical human radiation exposure in just a few hours. In fact, some parts of the forest are still considered so dangerous that they are avoided by both workers and researchers. Research has revealed that certain areas within the Red Forest are still highly contaminated with cesium-137 and strontium-90, 2 radioactive elements released by the explosion. These contaminants are known for their ability to persist in the environment for decades and even centuries. In fact, some researchers believe the radiation has turned the land into a radiation tomb, with the forest itself locked in a permanent state of decay. Despite the grim findings, the Red Forest is not entirely devoid of life. In fact, some species of plants and animals have been found to adapt to the extreme radiation levels. However, it came at a cost, one that's so shocking, the discovery left scientists completely stunned. But before we get to that, it's important to understand just how devastating the long-term impact that 1986 disaster has had on the ecosystem. A team of researchers decided to monitor the Red Forest through a series of motion-activated cameras. These cameras were initially set up in key areas of the forest, where researchers expected to capture footage of wildlife returning to the area over time. But what they found instead was both surprising and chilling. The cameras revealed very little activity in the most contaminated sections of the forest. While there were occasional glimpses of animals like wild boars and foxes near the outskirts of the zone, the footage inside the heavily contaminated core of the exclusion zone showed little to no signs of life, movement, or activity. Scientists were puzzled because, although some other parts of Chernobyl's exclusion zone have seen a return of wildlife, the core of the red forest seems to remain almost completely lifeless. This lack of animal presence points to something that scientists are still grappling with. They discovered that animals, instinctively, avoid the most contaminated parts of the red forest. It's as though they sense danger, as if the radiation is so potent that it repels them. The truth is, whether by instinct or through some genetic memory, wildlife seems to recognize the deadly nature of that zone and steers clear of the areas that have absorbed the most radiation. The cameras, while confirming the absence of certain species, have also shown the disturbing reality of radiation's effect on the area, because the wildlife that did venture close to the contaminated zone began displaying abnormal behavior by running away from the camera traps or avoiding direct paths, as though the radiation itself was telling them to leave. And so, it became very clear that the forest's radioactive threat wasn't just in the air but in the very soil and plants that the animals might touch or consume. But the real question is, how does this radioactively altered landscape affect the animals that dare to enter it? What's happening to them, deep within this radioactive graveyard? It turns out that this eerie absence of life in the red forest's radioactive core hints at a darker truth, one that even scientists are struggling to understand. The animals that venture into these dangerous zones aren't just surviving, they're transforming in ways no one could have anticipated. 5. Wildlife mutations and adaptations, nature's unlikely comeback. Human activity in the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone ceased decades ago. However, in that same place, nature began an extraordinary journey of transformation that has left scientists in awe. While the remnants of human habitation continue to decay, wildlife has slowly and finally returned to Chernobyl, but it didn't just return, it has undergone some extremely disturbing changes, and some of these animals have found a way to adapt to the lingering radiation in ways that continue to intrigue scientists worldwide. Perhaps one of the most striking examples of adaptation is found in the eastern tree frog, also known as Hyla orientalis. Typically, these frogs have a bright green skin coloration. However, within the exclusion zone, these frogs have developed an unusual and significantly darker skin pigmentation. Deeper research by scientists revealed that this change is attributed to increased melanin levels, which can help to protect the frogs against ionizing radiation. In fact, researchers also discovered that the darker coloration not only gives the frogs a survival advantage but is more pronounced in frogs from areas with higher radiation levels at the time of the accident, and this just proves that nature responded to the historical disaster in Chernobyl with an extremely intriguing evolutionary mutation. But these frogs are not the only animals experiencing the mutation. Birds, particularly barn swallows in the region, have also been extensively studied by scientists. Between 1991 and 2006, scientists observed a higher incidence of physical deformities in these birds compared to populations outside the exclusion zone. The scientists found abnormalities such as deformed beaks, albinistic feathers, bent tail feathers, and deformed air sacs. But that's not all. They also discovered that the affected birds exhibited reduced reproductive success, smaller brain sizes, malformed sperm, and even cataracts. The scientists decided to dig even further, and what they discovered was even more disturbing. They reported high frequencies of albinism and tumors in free-living birds around Chernobyl, and in a sample of 1,669 birds captured between 2010 and 2012, researchers recorded 111 cases of partial albinism and 25 cases of tumor formation, correlating with varying levels of background radiation. But it's not just about the birds and the amphibians, because scientists also discovered that mammals in the exclusion zone have also exhibited notable changes. For example, a population of wild dogs residing near the Chernobyl exclusion zone has provided scientists with insights into the effects of long-term radiation exposure. Genetic analyses of these dogs revealed some disturbing alterations, which are potentially linked to the effects of the radiation. In fact, studies have shown that various groups, including mammals, have experienced a drastic reduction in their population sizes, especially those living in highly radioactive parts of the exclusion zone. However, despite these observations, the scientific community remains divided on the long-term implications of radiation on wildlife genetics and health. Some researchers argue that the mutations and adaptations observed happened due to nature's resilience and ability to evolve under stress. However, others are warning that these changes may have some unforeseen consequences and could potentially affect the health of future generations. For instance, While certain studies have found that the Chernobyl accident survivors, especially the children, had no significant increase in DNA mutations, it's not the same for animals, as other studies have documented elevated mutation rates in various species within the zone. And this has fueled even more debates between researchers and scientists on the full impact of radiation on living organisms. But these mutations aren't the most shocking discovery in Chernobyl, because as scientists watched birds hatch with bent beaks and frogs change their very skin to survive, a deeper question arose. Was all of nature merely adapting, or was something else thriving? Because buried deep in the ruins of Chernobyl's radioactive core, researchers stumbled on a life form that wasn't just surviving radiation. It was feeding on it. And what they found next completely shattered what they thought they knew about the limits of life on Earth. 4. The fungus that feeds on radiation. When most life fled or withered under the invisible blanket of radiation in Chernobyl, something else began to thrive. In the shadowed ruins of Reactor 4, where the air still hums with danger, scientists discovered an unlikely survivor. They discovered fungi, but not just any fungi. These were dark, resilient, and doing something previously unthinkable, feeding on radiation. In the early 2000s, when researchers were exploring the highly contaminated reactor building, they noticed black mold growing steadily on the walls, even in areas with extremely high radiation levels. These fungi weren't just surviving, they seemed to be flourishing. But the big question was, in a place where every living thing was dying, how were they surviving? That's when scientists discovered that these fungal species contained high levels of melanin, the same pigment that gives human skin its color and helps protect against ultraviolet radiation. But in these fungi, melanin wasn't just a passive shield. It was doing something extraordinary. According to a 2007 study, researchers found that melanin-rich fungi such as Cladosporium sphaerospermum and Wangiella dermatitidis might be using a process known as radiosynthesis to survive. Just as plants use chlorophyll to turn sunlight into energy through photosynthesis, these fungi in the ruins of Chernobyl may be using melanin to convert gamma radiation into chemical energy. In other words, radiation wasn't a threat to them, it was actually a food source. This discovery stunned the scientific community. These fungi were essentially turning one of the most lethal forces on Earth into life-sustaining fuel. Inside the Chernobyl reactor, where human presence is still limited to short visits in hazmat suits, these dark organisms were quietly multiplying, undisturbed, efficient, and eerily at home. In 2016, NASA took notice. Intrigued by their potential, researchers even sent samples of Cladosporium sphaerospermum to the International Space Station just so they could see if these radiation-loving organisms could be used to shield astronauts from cosmic radiation on deep space missions. The results were quite promising. In fact, scientists were elated to discover that this humble mold from a nuclear wasteland might one day help protect humans on Mars. But beyond its utility, the discovery raises some even deeper and unsettling questions. If life can not only endure radiation but feed on it, what does that say about evolution in extreme environments like Chernobyl? What kinds of organisms could exist in the radioactive landscapes of other planets or even in the aftermath of our own disasters? In Chernobyl, nature has been forced to adapt in the most unexpected ways. The fungi don't just resist the fallout, they embrace it, becoming darker, stronger, and more bizarre with each generation. Yet the presence of these fungi isn't comforting. It's haunting. They're growing in places we consider uninhabitable, places filled with human tragedy. Places where the land still remembers the panic of April 26, 1986. It's almost poetic that in the very space humans can't endure for long, these organisms bloom. But this isn't the only mystery hiding in the irradiated shadows of Chernobyl. Because while fungi found a way to feed on radiation, other life forms began changing in ways scientists still don't fully understand, leaving them in the cameras to witness something even more chilling, something no one expected to see. 3. The reactor that refuses to sleep. Tucked beneath the massive steel structure now covering the ruins of Reactor 4, scientists have discovered that something strange has begun to happen again. In 2021, scientists noticed something worrying. Inside one of the sealed-off rooms deep under the reactor, known as Room 3052, radiation sensors started picking up rising levels of neutron emissions. This might sound technical, but in simple terms, it means this reactor, which was thought to be long dead by scientists, might still be alive in a small but dangerous way. You see, these neutron spikes suggest nuclear reactions could still be happening quietly, slowly, but persistently in the melted remains of the fuel that caused the 1986 disaster. It's like glowing embers buried deep in ashes, not a roaring fire, but still hot and still able to reignite if left alone. But where exactly is it coming from? Well, back during the explosion, the uranium fuel rods inside Reactor 4 melted down and mixed with sand, concrete, and steel. This formed a strange, rock-like substance called corium. It flowed through the plant like lava, eventually hardening into massive, dark clumps inside several rooms, and this particular room, 305, is one of those rooms. But it's not just any room. This one is nearly impossible to reach. It's deep inside the wreckage, which is surrounded by unstable structures, collapsed walls, and intense radiation, and no one's been inside it since 1986. But yet, from behind those thick concrete walls, sensors are now showing signs that fission reactions may still be flickering to life. The question is, how dangerous is this discovery? At the moment, scientists say we're not in immediate danger because the neutron levels are still low, but they are steadily increasing, and that's a reason to get worried. Nuclear reactions need a few key ingredients, like fuel, neutrons, and something to slow the neutrons down so the reaction can keep going. That's what happened during the original meltdown, and now, it seems the melted fuel in this hidden room might be finding those conditions again. Even though the reactions are weak, they could grow stronger under the right circumstances. Some experts compare it to a smoldering coal, which is mostly harmless unless stirred up or fed with new fuel. And if that happens, it wouldn't just be a second Chernobyl-level explosion, but it could release more radioactive material into the environment, damage what's left of the structure, or make it harder to safely dismantle the site in the future. But the problem lies in the fact that getting into that room is extremely complicated because the room is not only sealed shut, it's also heavily contaminated and located in a part of the reactor that's incredibly hard to reach, impossible, even. Modern robots would struggle to work inside those conditions, as the radiation would quickly fry their circuits. Although scientists have proposed sending in specialized drones or robotic arms to insert neutron-absorbing materials, like boron, that could cool the reaction and bring the neutron levels back down, getting the tools inside is a massive challenge. There's also some uncertainty around what exactly is going on in that room, because the sensors only give limited data. We can tell that neutron levels are rising, but we can't see the fuel, we can't touch it, and we don't fully understand how it's behaving after almost 40 years. Ironically, some experts believe the new steel structure, called the new safe confinement, which was placed over the reactor in 2016, might have changed the conditions inside. Before the dome, the reactor was open to the weather. Rain, wind, and seasonal temperature swings may have been disrupting the corium and keeping the neutron activity low. However, now, with everything sealed off, the air is dry and the temperature is more stable, and that might actually be helping the fuel react again. This isn't to say the dome was a mistake. It was built to prevent radioactive dust and debris from escaping, and it's done that job well. But like everything in Chernobyl, solutions often come with new problems. Right now, scientists are watching closely. Sensors are tracking the neutron levels day by day, looking for signs that the reaction is accelerating or stabilizing. Time is still on our side, but the growing emissions are a warning. But there are other mysterious signs that point to the possibility that Chernobyl may be warning us. 2. The glow that defied the darkness. As night falls over the remains of Reactor 4, the sky above the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone is often illuminated by a strange, eerie blue glow. These mysterious lights, with a blue-violet color, look almost otherworldly in their intensity and have baffled scientists and intrigued visitors for years. They flicker above the reactor's ruined core, visible even through thick clouds of radioactive dust. This phenomenon has been reported multiple times, especially after the explosion, leading some to wonder if these lights are a sign of something beyond the grasp of ordinary understanding. The first accounts of this strange glow came from survivors of the disaster itself, people who were there when the explosion occurred. Shortly after the reactor exploded in April 1986, firefighters and military personnel reported seeing these eerie glows in the sky and the surrounding area. But these glowing lights didn't just appear in the hours following the explosion, they continued to flash intermittently for several days. What was even more disturbing was the fact that they appeared during the night, illuminating the landscape with an eerie, ghostly glow, which was visible from miles away. This glow was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Radiation levels were off the charts, but these blue lights didn't seem to come from anything man-made, nor did they resemble anything familiar from nature. It was as if something darker was alive and thriving in the aftermath of the disaster. For years, no one could quite explain the strange blue light. Some speculated it was some kind of supernatural phenomenon, while others linked it to the intense radiation that had filled the air after the explosion. But scientists finally soon provided an explanation. They discovered that what people were seeing were ionized air glows, a phenomenon that occurs when high levels of radiation interact with the atmosphere in a specific way. When high-energy radiation like that from the Chernobyl meltdown interacts with air molecules, it ionizes the air, knocking electrons loose from their normal positions. This process creates charged particles that can emit light as they recombine with electrons, creating a faint glow. This glow is often blue or violet in color, because high-energy radiation tends to ionize the air in such a way that it emits the specific wavelength of light. The same phenomenon can be seen in certain high-energy environments like space or nuclear reactors, where radiation levels are extremely high. This phenomenon has been dubbed Cherenkov radiation, but it is not only unique to Chernobyl. Even today, the blue glow is sometimes visible above Reactor 4, though not as frequently as in the years immediately following the explosion. But why does this glow persist after all these years? Well, some scientists believe that radiation continues to leak from the reactor, although at lower levels, and is still capable of causing this ionization effect. But while the blue glow can be explained by ionized air phenomena and Cherenkov radiation, it raises even more disturbing questions than answers. Is the continued glow a sign of ongoing activity within Reactor 4? Could it indicate that the reactor is still subtly leaking radiation, despite being encased in the new safe confinement dome? Despite the science behind the glow, it still feels like something otherworldly, almost like the reactor itself is alive and still radiating its haunting presence. This glow feels like a reminder of the power Chernobyl still holds over us to this day. It's a symbol of an event that changed the world and a stark reminder that we are still living with its consequences. But what else could be hiding in the shadows of Chernobyl's dark legacy? Just when it seemed the story of Chernobyl had settled into eerie silence, something unexpected just broke through the stillness. And it holds a controversial future for this haunted zone that only a few could have ever imagined. 1. A new future for Chernobyl? In early 2022, as Russian forces advanced into Ukraine, something unsettling began to unfold deep within the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, something so disturbing no one had prepared for. Amidst the war, satellite data and ground sensors lit up with alarming news that radiation levels in the zone were rising fast. These weren't minor fluctuations. They were sharp spikes, picked up across multiple monitoring systems. In a region long thought to be slowly stabilizing, this sudden increase immediately raised red flags within the global scientific community. The Ukrainian State Agency for Exclusion Zone Management was quick to react. Officials initially attributed the spikes to a very simple explanation. They said the heavy movement of Russian military vehicles, such as their tanks and armored trucks, churned through the fragile topsoil of Chernobyl's contaminated grounds, and this possibly led to the unearthing of radioactive particles that had settled deep in the earth over decades. But as the data poured in, other theories began to surface. Some researchers and watchdog groups noted irregularities in the readings that couldn't be easily explained by soil disturbance alone. The spikes appeared too erratic, and in some cases, too localized. A few experts raised the chilling possibility of deliberate electronic interference, that the monitoring systems themselves might have been tampered with, or that remote signals were manipulated. But it turns out that it wasn't just their vehicles. Russian troops seized the Chernobyl site and had gone ahead to explore the environment without proper safety measures, and it wasn't long before they began experiencing symptoms of acute radiation syndrome. Reacting to the news, then Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine Irina Vereshchuk said the Russian troops who dug trenches in the forest received such doses of radiation due to their exploration of Chernobyl that the consequences will eventually be explained to them by doctors in special protective suits. While no conclusive evidence has confirmed sabotage by Russian troops, the incident revealed something deeper and disturbing. Chernobyl's radiation monitoring infrastructure could be more vulnerable than scientists thought. Decades of underfunding, limited oversight, and geopolitical instability have all taken a toll. The idea that such a dangerous site could be manipulated, physically or even digitally, shook confidence in the region's safety protocols. Even more concerning is the fact that many of these sensors are the world's early warning systems. If something were to go wrong in Chernobyl again, it's these very tools that would be expected to sound the alarm. And in a world still grappling with the threat of nuclear conflict, that realization hit hard. And yet, just as the world was catching its breath from this scare, news broke of a surprising, controversial proposal. Despite the area's dark history, Ukraine announced that Chernobyl might soon become the site of a new kind of nuclear experiment that involves the installation of small modular reactors. These aren't your typical hulking power plants. These reactors are designed to be safer, more efficient, and more flexible than their traditional counterparts. Ukraine, like many nations, is looking toward these reactors as part of a cleaner, more sustainable energy future. And for some in the country's scientific and political circles, Chernobyl represents more than just a cautionary tale. it's an opportunity to discover and achieve more. By turning the exclusion zone into a hub for cutting-edge nuclear research, Ukraine hopes to reclaim the narrative. Instead of a place defined by disaster, they hope that Chernobyl can be a place that symbolizes resilience, progress, and redemption. But, of course, not everyone is convinced. Many scientists warn that any new nuclear development in the region must be approached with extreme caution because the structural integrity of existing facilities, the risk of lingering radiation hotspots, and the political instability of a war-torn region all make this an extremely risky gamble. Still, pilot projects are already being considered, and feasibility studies are underway. If successful, Ukraine wouldn't just be rewriting the future of Chernobyl, it could be reshaping the future of nuclear energy itself. But what do you think? Should Chernobyl be left alone, or can it be transformed for good? Tell us in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.